Welcome to the Clifton Worley Show. This week we have Carmen Brandy with us, and she is a singer-songwriter, and excited to have you on the show, Carmen.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, Carmen, you've got a lot to your story, and I just kind of want to get right down to it. You, you're a young singer-songwriter, working in Nashville. You're process of recording an album, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But how did music begin for you, if you don't mind, kind of just giving us a little bit of your journey?
Yeah. Well, um, when I was 7 or 8, I began to take note of my dad. We lived in a two-story house back in Tampa, Florida. And in our second story, we had this bonus room, and my dad is a musician and he plays a variety of instruments. And I would always hear him covering Billy Joel songs, Keith Green music, and the Bee Gees. If there was a high-pitched vocalist who was also a man, he would sing all of their songs. Um, so I was kind of exposed to music early on. My dad had an affinity for like amazing pianists. He himself is a really incredible piano player. So when I was just a little babe, he got me into lessons. And that was really my first exposure to music, hearing my dad play covers of his favorite artists, and then him encouraging me to start playing myself.
Cool. So that started out taking piano lessons, correct?
Yeah, yep, started taking piano lessons.
Kind of what was your thinking at the time, and kind of the background of what's going on and what was influencing you?
Yeah, my dad, being the musical man he was, encouraged me at a very early age to also um, pursue music in some capacity. And like any child, I wanted to just play and have my friends and just do things that kids do. And a lot of kids enjoy piano lessons and enjoy music. But at that time in my life, I was very athletic. Had a lot of passions for ice skating and horses, and I was a very outgoing young girl. So sitting down to practice piano, once or twice a week was more of the like a chore than it was a passion at that time in my life. So I really took piano lessons just because my dad wanted me to, and I wanted to please him. I wanted to also have that musical gene and carry the baton of piano playing, but it just wasn't something I was particularly interested in at a young age.
Right, right. And I've seen that happen, where kids, it's hard, it's like everybody has the like point, every musician has the point where like a light bulb goes off and they want to do it, but
Right.
sometimes if it comes before that, sometimes it's just not, it doesn't click, or the interest doesn't lie there. So I think every musician has like that age. It's hard to say if it's, like a young kid or a teenager or whatever, but like, everybody has that point at whichever they want to pursue it. So, I mean, at what point did that click with you that, hey, I really, this is interesting to me, I want to do this?
Yeah. Well, I would agree. I would agree completely with you. I think that we could say that in every musician's life, there's a moment where your interest is peak, greater, as opposed to in the past when maybe you've dabbled in some kind of music before. Um, and that for me happened when I was 12. Um, I'd always been around instruments. My dad is a multi-instrumentalist, and I mean anything he picks up, he can play. He's just very talented in that sense. And there was this one day, my dad's left-handed, so all of our instruments are because he's the only person in my family that plays music, and um, I would always pick up his guitars, and I'm right-handed, and try to play his left-handed guitars. And I started to do that for a period of a couple weeks, and my dad began to take note of that. And one day he came up to the second floor little studio we had and said, "No more. Let's go buy you a guitar." So,
Wow.
yeah, it's sweet. Ever since then, my interest definitely was sparked because I had the interest to sit down and want to play music, as opposed to my parents encouraging me to, and it becoming more of a, a chore than a joy to sit down and do.
So would you say that your interest went more along with playing the guitar than it did with the piano?
I think my writing came right at the same time of my desire to start playing guitar. I think it's because piano, it's some I can still play today, but it's not an instrument that I find to be conventional for me. Just because I think about how difficult it is to log like a piano around from show to show, and I think unconsciously maybe I realized that at a young age. Um, and also, there's so much more, in my opinion, theory that goes into being a good pianist. We often hear at the four chords and the truth, and anybody can play guitar, and I think that's true. I think that anyone can sit down and learn E minor, C, G, and D. Um, and coming from the classical piano background, it was like easy and it was fun, as opposed to like sitting down and really having to practice. And that's not to say that guitar doesn't take a lot of practice and a lot of effort to hone your craft. It does. But for me, in that time of my life, I found it to be a much easier thing to grasp than it was for me to play piano. So I would say writing and playing guitar came at the same time because I finally found an instrument that I could put music to the words I had in my head.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting journey in of itself. I'm gonna kind of go off on this for a minute. Um, is the unique nature between taking words and pairing those up with melodies and chord progressions, and I think that guitar is easy to lend itself to that, because when you are learning chords and you got your three or four chords that you're playing with, there's only so many directions you can go, and you start to hear the patterns, and um, I think it's something that's almost subliminal for like a musician. Like they start thinking of phrasing and how to say what they want to say, and you know, um, it's one of those that if it literally is, you could throw a few chords and some progressions, and it's easy to get like the barrier entry is easy to start writing songs, and before you know it, like it's easy to, oh my goodness, I have all these songs.
Right.
Um, I mean, it's almost like it's almost it's almost like I think it either comes natural sometimes, or it's something like has to be a lot of work at, and it's interesting how, like, you're talking about your musical background with your dad. I'm sure that ran a lot deeper and he didn't realize it at the time, like how that was kind of just bearing fruit from that.
Oh yeah. I definitely think that much of my I think I do have somewhat of a natural ability to pick up an instrument
Hmm.
and catch on quick. I remember when I first got my guitar, I was playing songs within, the first couple hours I purchased it, and I had never even formed, chords before. And that's not necessarily significant or like, above average, but some people, some take a little bit longer to be able to play a progression, and also sing at the same time, because that's a whole nother thing to sing and play guitar. I know some people who still have a hard time
Yeah.
doing it. Amazing instrumentalist. So yeah.
Well, what was what was some of your early influences? I mean, kind of what was propelling you along?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say my early influences as a child, um, or as a young woman rather, um, I really didn't start listening to music seriously until I was probably around 13 or 14. I remember making my first trip to Texas to record a EP with Reba McEntire's producer and engineer. And it was like a big deal to me. You know, somebody in the industry was interested in working and collaborating on a project. And I remember in the hotel, we were there for 2 weeks, and all I could listen to was the Civil Wars. They just brought out so much angst in my little preteen heart. um, and I also, to this day, John Paul and Joy Williams, although they're, no longer touring as a duo, individually have inspired my own music and my dynamics with my voice and my instruments significantly. Joy Williams, I would say, has affected how I have dynamics in my live performances. She is really talented at just moving closer and farther from the mic, dependent upon like her vocal volume, and also just like the tone of her voice and vibrato is just it's naturally just so beautiful. And John Paul just has like such a way of keeping his instrumental parts to his music so simple yet profound. So I think that they were two of my biggest influences growing up in my own music. And if you like find my second project I did, I literally wrote a song that was kind of inspired by them, um, just because of how much that music influenced me as a young woman.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me ask you this, and this may be a tough question. But you talk about like kind of a contemporary, like something that was modern, that was influencing you, in your teens. Um, but a lot of times, like a lot of those things are on the surface, and we don't realize sometimes that there are things kind of in our background, and even as a child, that surface later, in our music
Absolutely.
influences. I can speak for that. Like there are things that genres of music that I wrote off that like my parents would listen to when I was a young kid that I didn't like. I can find myself now as an adult like that's coming out and it's part of my sound, and like I can't get away from it uh, very easily. I mean, do you think there's any element of that? You describing your dad was a musician. Do you think there's an element in that in your music?
Absolutely. I just actually covered a Bee Gees song in Charlotte this past weekend.
Nice.
And actually, for my recent single, Good Enough, Ryan, my producer, Ryan Poole, we used some elements of songs from the Beatles, not the Beatles, excuse me, the Beach Boys, for some guitar influences on our guitars for this track that I just did. And I can vividly remember as a child, we had this huge backyard in my home of Florida, and my dad would put on Beach Boys, and I just would run through the sprinklers when I was like 6 or 7, singing, "Wouldn't it be nice if we," um, and to this day, that music blesses my soul, and I think has impacted my musical taste and what I like greatly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I want to go back to your guitar playing. Okay. Um, what describe to me kind of like where your head is at when you're accompanying yourself. Is it part of your sound? Is that something you rely on? You know, accompanying yourself. Kind of, how do you approach guitar as a singer songwriter?
Yeah, it's incredibly important to me because I've never had anybody accompany me. I've had people, also play alongside of me, but I've never had like just another guitar player who would, be the instrumentalist and me just be the vocalist. My guitar and my vocals go hand in hand together. Um, my interest in guitar has grown over the years. I've taken lessons for many years. And now I've gotten to a place where I've kind of found my wheelhouse of what I enjoy greatly when I go to sit down. Nowadays, I find what I gravitate to when I just pick up my guitar. I pretty much exclusively play in open C and open D. Some of my favorite, artists of the past are Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez, and they both were known for playing in these beautiful open tunings like D and C. When I started educating myself on some of these incredible female artists of the past, um, I learned that the the tunings that they had were just amazing, and they opened up my world because at that point I'd really only played in maybe drop D, typically stayed in standard, and now and then I would capo my guitar in an interesting way, maybe only put my capo on four strings, or five strings instead of all six on a fret, and it would give it a different tone or something cool. But up until that point, a couple of years ago, I had never really dabbled with any other alternate tunings. So now when I perform out live, I have about three guitars that are all tuned in different tunings, and that way I can just swap them out real quick.
No, that's super interesting. I want to talk on that for a minute. First of all, open C is like my favorite one if you got to be in open tuning, just because it sounds so pretty with the bass thumping really low like that. And I think that a lot of times if you're like an artist and you're accompanying yourself by yourself, you need a very full range instrument that can thump and have some element of rhythm without having to do a lot of work with your hands.
Absolutely. I find that when I play out, when I'm playing with other artists, my guitar tends to just stand out sonically more because it's not just standard. I'm not just up there playing, you know regular chords. I'm still playing the same chords they are, but they just have this deeper quality to them simply because it's tuned open to that specific chord. People always come up to me and are like, why is your guitar so nice? And I'm like, your guitar can sound like this too. Just open tune it, to C or D. Or some of my favorite songs I've written from just experimenting and changing, a bass string to, a sharp, or just experimenting with different tunings that I've played with or created myself. It's rare I find ones that I'm obsessed with, because if it's not perfect, then you can only play so many chord patterns. But open tuning is kind of where I stay nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. Is are you capoing a lot, like going
Yeah,
between different keys? Okay,
yeah, I definitely do. I find that if I don't change it up, it can get into a rhythm of it just sounding the same.
totally.
So I try my best. I think I do a good job playing with both D and C. Those are the two open tunings I use every day, and I tend to lean towards C. I always say open C for Carmen. um, but yeah, I capo frequently, and I try my best not to just do the typical like barring of just the fret or just the top three strings. I try to find different, forms of chords that are interesting, or doing melodic things, finding a melodic, a melody to play on the guitar and follow it vocally as opposed to just playing chords. Um, it's been amazing for me. It really just opened up a new world of songwriting. One of my best friends came over to my house probably like
6 months ago, and she picked up my guitar and she went to go play an E minor, and it sounded terrible. And I was like, this is open C. And now 6 months later, she's written so many new songs on that tuning, just because like when standard is all you can kind of burn yourself out of trying to create different. If you are just kind of the basic, chord progression kind of person, you'll burn yourself out with trying to figure out new things. And then sometimes it's fun to give yourself a refreshing new tuning, just to give yourself a new pool of inspiration for your own art in songwriting.
Totally. Another thing I think that has been key, as me as a guitar player, has been to find different types of guitars that fit in different pockets. I can find myself, like if I get a different guitar, I find myself a few months later playing guitar a little bit differently.
Right.
And I think that's any, like, if you're trying to create music, you and you want to be well versed, you want to have several tools in your toolbox, and so you need something that pushes you in different directions as a guitar player, I think.
Yeah, a different guitar for a different mood.
Yeah, totally.
I completely agree. Like right now, as I'm sitting in my room, I have two in my room right now, and I have this. My two favorite guitar brands are Gretsch and Taylor. And I have a little Jim Dandy songwriting Gretsch guitar on my wall that every time I go to pick that one up, I either have it in standard or some kind of alternate tuning I'm experimenting with. Mostly because it's just that. It's my experimental guitar. I find myself like late at night, probably like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. when I can't sleep. It's literally hanging on next to my bed. I pick it up and I just will I usually finger pick on that guitar because it has a steel neck. And it just has this really interesting tone to it. It's that guitar, I do that on that guitar. And then I have a hummingbird in the corner of my room, and that's my first guitar. And excuse me, let me paraphrase that. A hummingbird Epiphone. But let me just say, it's one of the best guitars I own. It's one of the oldest guitars I own, but it just sounds so amazing. I've had Gibsons before. I've had a J200 before, and it did not even come in comparison to my hummingbird Epiphone. I have quite the fiasco story of my J200. I don't have it anymore, but that guitar means so much to me because it's my first, and no matter what I play or how bad I play, it still sounds good.
Yeah. Well, I love the way our hummingbird sounds, personally. Well, tell me about that Taylor you mentioned.
Yeah. I was never particularly a fan of Taylor. I always had a Taylor, let me just say. And they always tended to be models that were, it wasn't the nicest model, but it was, it was good, right? And they all sounded very just tin canny, just very on the higher end, not much bass at all. I mean, I suppose that's what Taylor kind of is known for. But I have this beautiful Taylor 12th fret classical full body guitar, and it's made out of I think it's made out of I wish I knew what kind of wood it's made out of, but it's a very dark red wood. Mm-hmm. And it is the most incredibly deep, beautiful, vibrant guitar I've ever owned. I was in church this past Sunday, and Chris Tomlin leads worship at our church a lot in Franklin, Tennessee, and that's the guitar he uses. It's exclusively the only guitar he uses, and I don't see many people with them. They're very I'm a very petite person. Chris Tomlin's a petite person. Mm-hmm. And I think they're just I really enjoy a full body, but when I had for instance my J200, which is a full body, it consumed me. It was huge. And this one, it's like, it's 12 fret. It's a smaller body, but still full. Yet it has the sound of a J200, except in my opinion, way better.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's beautiful.
So that one's classical. You said this nylon string. Is that what you were?
No, when I always use the incorrect word when I say classical. It has a classical style headstock where
Gotcha.
the you there it's a typical fretboard, but the headstock, you have to do the strings the difficult way.
Like the open headstock.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I bet I would be willing to bet that what you're describing, because I've got a Taylor with a cedar top. I bet that's a cedar top. It's kind of darkens up and.
Yeah, I think I'm looking because I'm literally looking it up as we speak. It's called a Taylor 330, sorry, Taylor 322E 12 fret. And I think this one is a little bit different than mine because I don't have a pick guard,
Mhm.
and it's more of a shiny wood, but same idea.
Yeah. Well, I think that you know, like as a vocalist and artist, that it's important to find the right guitar to kind of give you your voice as a player.
Yeah, absolutely. It's out of all the guitars I've played, it's definitely the one that I feel complements my voice the most. I definitely like on my bucket list of next guitar purchases, I would really love to get, some kind of custom model of my current guitar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I really do feel like I've found the one.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I think a good guitar is just part of someone's sound,
Yeah.
personally. Um, well, let's shift gears a little bit here, and I want to get into your story of how you found yourself living in Nashville and pursuing music and working on this album, and kind of just tell the story the way you want to tell it, and I'll just sit back and listen and ask questions along the way.
Awesome. Well, you know how I was exposed to music now. My dad and him being an instrumentalist himself. So I was around 12 at that time. I made my first trip to Nashville on a way back from Ohio, where a lot of my extended family is. We were up there for Christmas and decided to stop in Nashville back to Florida just for the day. While we were there that night, we were searching all around for venues to play the night of. And, I'm only 12, so there's nowhere that I can get into to play. And nowhere that could put me in a round that short of notice. So after looking and calling and doing all the research that we could, we finally went back to our hotel, kind of gave up. And lo and behold, I shouldn't have been surprised, but since we were fresh new Nashville people, they were having a show in the hotel lobby. And it was at the Lowe's Vanderbilt. I ended up being able to perform, and there were two writers in the crowd that had connections to Reba McEntire's people. And I ended up getting connected and writing with them over Skype, just like this, when I was in Florida. We wrote an assortment of different songs, and eventually I flew out to or excuse me, drove drove out to Texas, where we recorded a short EP. It was an awesome experience. I got to record with amazing instrumentalists like George Strait's piano player and fiddle player. It was definitely on the more Texas swing of things. uh, but that was my first experience really working in music. After that experience, my desire to songwrite just grew over the years, and we would repeatedly make trips up to Nashville. Eventually, we decided to move. My family, we are dreamers. My dad, he had this dream to get his law degree, and he's always been an aspirational person and just has dabbled in anything and everything you can think of, and that was one of his dreams. So he applied to a law school up here, and we just felt like it was a sign from the Lord that, music was calling me, and education was calling my dad. So as a family, we collectively, picked up everything we had in Florida and moved to Nashville. And that's really where things began up here.
Yeah, that's super interesting that it wasn't just um hey, we're gonna move to Nashville so you can pursue this, but like it was like a multifaceted thing, like for you and your dad, like both on a journey. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. He's about to graduate this year, and I couldn't be more proud. So,
Nice, nice. Well, I visiting Nashville, um, it's such an inspiring place. But if you would, because I think that like there's this fascination with that town and the stories and everything, um, and every musician wants to experience it. What what is it like when you make the leap and you go there? What's different about it than maybe what you imagined, and kind of talk about, if you don't mind, the maybe like the apples to oranges of it.
yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think you're right. There is, from the outside looking in, from maybe someone who wants to make the move, there is this inherent fascination with my dreams could be achieved because everyone and anyone who could help me achieve that dream are literally on two streets. And we call it Music Row. And the greats have created records there and become icons of music. And I could do that too, right? So many people move here with the intent of meeting these people on Music Row and seeing their dreams come to be, which was my dream in a sense. I think I had more of a realistic approach because I'm an only child. My parents are very much, realists. They kept me humble. But I would say that the fascination it's put into the wrong hands. Let me explain. I think the fascination of Nashville should be with the people. If you think about it, Nashville would not survive if it wasn't for the aspiring musicians and songwriters that live here. Because otherwise, who would be able to sustain their, huge organizations and corporations that sign dozens of artists a year? It's those people who've taken the step of faith to say, you know what, I'm going to move with a dream in hopes that someone will notice me. And if it weren't for those people, there would be no Music Row, and there would be no one to represent. So the people, and when I say that, I mean more so the community that is here, the friends that have turned to family in Nashville for me are like no other. We are supporters of each other. Specifically, my female, fellow musician friends here, they are incredible. My female music friends are some of the most talented instrumentalists, songwriters, and performers I've ever met, and could hold a candle to any of the top-notch females you see, in the spotlight. And a lot of them just don't get the recognition they deserve. And all in all, I think that the fascination should be with the beautiful community that keeps this town alive. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the degree of that, since you mentioned it, is maybe less of going to Nashville and making it versus uh I'm going there to be inspired to hone my craft and do what I do better in every way.
It's a great question. Well, what sounds easier, to say, I'm going to this place for someone to acknowledge me and to give me the opportunities, as opposed to I'm going to this place to hone my craft, you know, compare and contrast to other musicians of what I can be doing better. That one sounds a little bit more difficult, right? To, but it's essentially what makes you better. When you continually write with people who are better than you and you go to shows and see instrumentalists that have been here for years and have honed their craft for years, that's what grows you as an artist. And a lot of the quote that people say a lot around in Nashville is pay your dues, meaning play every show you can, write with as many people as you can. Really just be, like I like to say, the human sponge and absorb it all. And then after you've absorbed all you can, pick and choose what works for you and what will grow you as a singer or songwriter or an instrumentalist. So yeah.
Yeah, what have you learned in that journey, and how have you found your voice, do you think?
Well, I found my voice through a lot of my personal journeys. I lost my voice literally. In 2016, I experienced a lot of, trauma in college. And I also, had I spent some time out in California on The Voice. And just there was a lot of accumulation of personal issues and music dreams that some were being fulfilled, then unfulfilled, and then my personal life was just, absolutely, terrible. And the conglomeration of all of those things just kind of came to, a very bad point in my life where my voice kind of just shut down. I got mono, and that just was another added issue. I went to so many not voice, ears, nose, and throat doctors who could not figure out why I could not sing. I even had a really hard time talking properly. I went to a vocal therapist, and she discovered that I wasn't even like breathing properly. A lot of people unconsciously will talk for a very long time and they won't breathe. It's kind of weird. So I realized that there was something much deeper in my heart that was going on, and it took a lot of therapy and a lot of honesty with myself and with my relationship with the Lord to where regaining my voice back was something that was possible. And even then, after kind of healing in a way, it took me probably a couple months for me really to have strength in the tone of my voice, and be able to have the register that I used to. So finding my voice was a literal thing, you know. I'd always been able to sing really, really well, and then it was all gone for an entire year. So
Wow. Well, that's super interesting. Because you literally, it's finding your voice after losing it.
yes, and it's also in the metaphorical sense too. I really think that I have found my voice in Nashville. Um, I love this town. I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for Nashville today. Um, but I think that after meeting with so many publishers and people like Dale Bobo and Lisa and Doug Johnson, and meeting with Universal and Warner Chappell and Sony, all of those experiences were amazing, and I count myself blessed that I got to encounter those people and experience the wisdom that they could give to me. But a lot of it impacted me negatively. There were things said to me. Sony said this to me: "You're amazing. There's no doubt in my mind that you won't get signed, but just not with us."
Wow. And it's like, how do you process that, right?
Yeah, and it took me a long time to process that. Like, well, if I'm amazing and there's no doubt in your mind that I won't get signed, what is it that's holding you back? And I think being older and looking back at it now, I'm sure there were many factors. I was 16 at that time, and they weren't the only publisher that had said something similar to me. I remember two different instances. I met with Universal and I played them this song that at the time it was my best song, and it was the one that meant the most to me. The chorus said, how high is enough? You can't tell when you're looking down. The top won't fill you up because sometimes it's better on the ground. And, it's not that profound, but for 16, I was like, oh my gosh, it's the best song I'll ever write. Um, and, I performed it so beautifully. And if anything was on display, it was my passion and my heart for the music I was making. And he looked at me and he said, this is what's popular right now. Sony just signed her. And he plays this song, and it was like, Drunk Girls Don't Cry by Maren Boris. And I'm sitting there, 16. I'm like, this is what you want me to do?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the thing, is like being true to yourself, and I'm sure like the pressure to being commercially viable is making the decisions for yourself. How do I, how am I going to do this?
Yeah, it's definitely, if you aren't strong in what you love and what you feel you do well at, it can take a toll. And it definitely took a toll on my, creative ability. I remember I had a show at the filling station, and I was so depressed. I was so sad and distraught. I was in the middle of playing my set, and I literally just broke down and started bawling in front of a crowd of people. And I could not continue. I literally walked off the stage, and the crowd, only in Nashville, the crowd was so sweet and loving, and they totally understood. Because the song I was singing just meant so much to me, and I wrote it about Music Row, and I was so upset that I was pouring my heart out in front of these people, and it felt like it was just that. It was just a business meeting. And music to me is so much more than business. There's so much heart and soul that goes into the creation of music that when it's just what can you do for me, it takes that away from it a little.
Yeah. Well, I think, and this is the frustrating part of being a creator, or a creative person, is you want to create something and people understand it and get it. And sometimes finding that voice and finding that narrative that is common thread with people is the biggest struggle, because you do want to create and you want to relate to people on a broad level. But it's part of that struggle, I believe, that helps you communicate what you have to say, and really it's how to tell your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't take back a single meeting, because although I think I unconsciously took, a lot of negative from it, it taught me so much, not only about songwriting and the music industry. It taught me about myself and what I wanted to say, and not what other people wanted me to say, but what in my heart that was important for me to sing and write about.
Yeah. Well, what is that? What's important to you, and what do you have to say?
Mm. Well, that's a big question. I have a lot to say in the sense that I have so much love for people. My heart is for people. Whether God gives me the ability to use music as the driving component for me to love people more. It's up to him, but ultimately, I want people to listen to my music and feel like they've just been rejuvenated, or that they have an individual that they can relate to in some capacity. A lot of my songs, I have one song called Hearts Can Change, and it's about just my experience of moving to the South. And the first verse says, it's the 21st century heartbreak. There wasn't even a first date. He couldn't get through the door. He wasn't the color dad was looking for. He thinks, aren't we all made equal? Why can't people just be people? I thought we had moved past this. Who really gives a damn about my skin? The chorus basically summarizes the thought of, if this is the land of the free and this is the home of the brave, if it's in God we trust, why do we curse his name? And the rest of the song goes on to talk about, harassment in the workforce to women. And then finally, the bridge goes on to say, like, if it's in God we trust, then our hearts can change. And that's the kind of music I want to write, where ultimately it's directed towards groups of people that have felt oppressed, or who have felt like there isn't music catered to their struggle. I want to fill that void. Um, and because there are people that have filled that void to me, and I just want to do that. I want to do that too.
That's a good point. You said earlier that you wanted to make music that rejuvenated people, and it makes me wonder, has somebody done that musically to you, that like you experienced that, so you want to give that to your listener?
Absolutely. I can think of a very easy answer to that. There is an artist who has changed my life. Her name is Ellie Holcomb. You might know her. She is married to Drew Holcomb, and they're in a very popular band called Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors. And she had this record that my therapist recommended me to listen to, and she told me that there was this one song in particular that literally what was my song, of redemption. So that night I went home and played it, and I was sitting on my carpet in my bedroom just crying. Like, this woman must have known, surely she must have known what's happening in my life. She couldn't have written this song more accurately to what I needed to hear. I talked to my mom later that evening, and I told my Mom, I just pray one day I can have the opportunity to meet Ellie and tell her how much this song has helped me. And I later would help me even more in my life after I listened to her entire record. Um, that next morning, I met with my therapist, and as I'm sitting in the lobby waiting to go upstairs to see her, she's coming down with her client, and it's Ellie Holcomb. And Ellie walks downstairs, and she looks at me, and I just start crying, and she sits on the couch, and I tell her that I was praying the night before that I could tell her one day the song that she wrote, how much it touched my heart, and it made me feel seen. It made me feel like there was another person who also felt the way that I had. And we just sat there and cried, and she just held me, and it was just a moment of, like, this person is someone that I look up to and I'm inspired by, and who has helped me in my own personal struggles in life. So that was a beautiful moment. She is definitely one of those artists who have done that to me.
Also, that sounds awesome. And to I know, as a musician, sometimes I've heard people say never try to actually meet your hero because you may be disappointed. But I think in that instance, like, that was not the truth. Like, it was actually a very inspiring moment.
Yes, absolutely. I've actually met a lot of my heroes. I had a show one, and I've never been let down. I've never been let down. I had a show in Nashville at the Renaissance Hotel. It's this really cool venue called The Bridge. And I was playing. I used to play there a lot back in the day, and we talked about him a lot in the beginning of this podcast. But John Paul walks up there. When after he had listened to an hour of my set, when we spoke afterwards, he was so kind, loving, and generous with his compliments to my music and how he saw me making some kind of accomplishment or leeway in this music thing. You know, he was just very generous with his words, and he did not let me down. He was very, very kind.
That's awesome, actually, to know that you know, that those who you consider famous or whatever aren't, conceited or stuck in their own heads. That's awesome. And I think that's kind of the magic of maybe the music community sometimes is it's like you can relate to people on a because of the music and the story and the narrative. It just brings people together.
Absolutely. I think you can tell who is an authentic and genuine person just by listening to their music. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm sure there are very terrible people who write nice music. But I would argue that the people who aim to inspire others through their music tend to be good people. And the artists that I have come to know, who I've loved and looked up to, have never let me down in the personal sense.
Tell us about your upcoming project and what's going on there.
Yes. So after the release of my latest single, Good Enough, I've always had the dream of making a full-length record. I've done projects before where I've done 3 songs. I've released several singles, but I've never actually made a full-length record. So I've decided that I want to make that dream a possible thing. So this past month, I've launched a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter where I am trying to achieve the goal of creating my debut LP.
Awesome. Well, what do you kind of envision this LP being about?
Yeah, I really want the record to tell a story of kind of the past 2 years of my life and the journey that I've experienced with redemption and grace. I really, really did not want to live anymore for a very long time. And it took community and the motivation of myself to get better. But most importantly, it took the deepening of my relationship with Jesus that ultimately gave me the desire to live again. So I want this record to show people that another day is possible. And it's possible because there is hope and there is renewal for them.
Awesome. Well, I know that's a very deep subject, but if you don't mind sharing, kind of where did you find, or what did you learn that helped you want to live again?
Yeah, great question. For a long time in my freshman year of college, I like I've said earlier in this podcast, I experienced some trauma, and there was a lot of other components in my life that just added to the depression that I was experiencing. I've honestly battled suicidal thoughts since my early, preteen years of my life, and it kind of came to a peak when I was 18. I would drive to a big bridge in my area, and it's called the Natchez Trace Parkway. I would drive there, once a week with the hope that if I went there, I could stop my suffering, because it would just be something. I always thought it was a beautiful place to die. It's very twisted. And literally every time that I would drive there with that intent, I would encounter somebody on that bridge. I can think of multiple instances immediately that there were people that made the effort to come speak to me. And why, I don't know. um, how could have they feasibly known what I was there to do? Um, and I would always drive there at very, odd times of the day or night, and there was always someone there to talk me down unconsciously. So one night in particular, I remember having a conversation with a girl, and she was asking me a bunch of questions, and it made me want to go home. I didn't want to jump after this conversation. And as I was driving home, I was so upset at myself for coming back. So I had this thought of I could just drive my car into a pole.
Hmm.
And I could say that it was an accident, or I couldn't say it, but people could say it was an accident, and I wasn't trying to commit suicide. And I remember after I had that thought, I think it really hit me in my heart of how severe how desensitized I was to the idea of death, and how I was literally conjuring ideas of how I could eliminate myself just because I was in so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's just crazy. So after I had that thought, I went home, and the next morning I told my mom what was happening, what I experienced in college, and ultimately what I had been trying to attempt multiple times. And immediately she took me to therapy, and I began the course of healing.
Wow. Well, I just would like to ask, because, everybody knows someone who struggles with depression or, suicidal thoughts. What would you say would be, somebody who sees a loved one, they're going through this, what would you recommend somebody who's from the outside looking in, what to do, how to help?
Yeah. I mean, I just look at the people who spoke to me on that bridge,
Mm-hmm.
They just struck up conversation with me. And I'm not even sure they really knew how much it meant to me in that moment. How seen it made me feel. Because in that time of my life, I felt like no one cared and no one was interested in helping me. And these complete strangers they asked me how I was. So I actually have a song that I plan to record on my record. It's called The Strong Ones. And the hook, it says, "I'll watch that sad sunset past the concrete ledge. I came here to take that step, but somehow I don't, because I see all of the strong ones who thought they could do it alone." And the biggest thing I learned is that strength isn't holding everything in and just praying that you'll make it another moment. It's letting go and allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and people allowing people to love you. Because I didn't think that I was capable of being loved anymore because of what had happened to me, what I experienced, what I had chosen to do. And I allowed shame to rule my life. So from an individual who is seeing or witnessing a loved one also experiencing that, you just have to relentlessly love and be compassionate towards them, and always ask them how their day is, how is their heart. Make the initiative to make them feel important, because I can almost guarantee you that they don't feel that at all.
Mm. That's good. That's good. Well, for those who may be listening and they want to go check out this process that you're going through and check out the Kickstarter, where can they find that?
Yes. For any and all social needs, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Carmen Brandy. And I pretty much keep everything updated frequently on those two platforms. And you can find my latest blog posts, my email list, and a link to all of my music on my website, which is carmenbrandy.com. But if people are interested in, pledging to make this record a possible thing, they can go to kickstarter.com/Carmen Brandy, where they can go to my Kickstarter pledge page and they can read my bio, watch the video, and maybe pledge.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I did notice that you have a video with your Kickstarter that kind of tells your whole story. And a lot of the things you shared in this podcast are you piece it together, a narrative, kind of what you're about. I'm going to post that. It's going to be available in the Clifton Worley Show Facebook group. So, listeners, go check it out there. Go follow Carmen and follow her journey as she's making this album. And I'm sure it's going to be great. And can't wait to hear it and experience it.
Thank you so much, Clifton. This has been such a wonderful experience.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we're just glad to get to know you and to, our listeners to go check you out.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.